Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to this penultimate session of the Bristol Technology Festival. My name is Adam Powell. I'm Business Development Manager on the Bristol+Bath Creative R+D programme. This afternoon, we're going to be reimagining digital placemaking and considering technology in the public realm towards 2030. Thanks very much for joining us today. And this session has been really helped and curated by the great team at TechSpark. They've put together 40 sessions running this week. So very much thank you to Ben Shorrock, Shona Wright, Geraint Evans and the team. So we're going to be delving in this afternoon, looking at where creativity, technology and place meet. We're going to be reflecting on how technology is influencing the design of our towns and our cities and the places of the future, and looking at how we can creatively engage people and communities in place-based design. We'll be hearing some innovative and varied conceptual approaches and real-life applications of place-based technologies, from social dreaming to digital twins in the development of future public realm. I won't be doing this on my own today, however, and I'm delighted to say that I'll be joined by a stellar lineup of artists, practitioners, strategic thinkers, and you'll be hearing from them very shortly. I'll be introducing Paul Clarke. Paul is a senior lecturer at the University of Bristol and also director of Uninvited Guests. We'll also be inviting Will Taylor, who's one of our new talent fellows. Will is a creative producer, podcaster, project coordinator on the Elevate programme and director of Two Tone Zone. We'll then be hearing from Ruby Jennings, and Ruby is one half of Little Lost Robot. She's one of the prototype teams that were commissioned by the Bristol+Bath Creative R+D partnership, and she'll be talking about the commissioned Stupid Cities as part of digital placemaking. And then finally, Stephen Hilton, a fellow and director and founder of City Global Futures, will be joining the stage to give us his views and his learnings from his research as part of the project. We look forward to hearing from them shortly. I also just wanted to take this opportunity to showcase my 1982 replica Scotland top, given the momentous win of Scotland yesterday. I've been waiting 22 years for us to qualify for a major football tournament, and I couldn't let today's platform go amiss without mentioning that. So excuse that brief moment of indulgence. Little bit of housekeeping. You will see to the right of the screen a chat option. We'd love to hear from you during the session, so do please send us any messages or ask any questions for our speakers at any point during the session. As well as being Friday the 13th today, for those of you who are suspicious, it's also World Kindness Day, so you're very welcome to bear that in mind when you reflect and comment in the chat. So the Bristol+Bath Creative R+D programme is it's a project that's been running since 2019. It's a £7 million research project delivered in partnership with an exciting collaboration with the 4 universities across the west of England, so University of Bath, Bath Spa University, University of Bristol and UE, alongside Creative Technology Centre Watershed based in Bristol. We're funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council as part of the government's industrial strategy, and we're part of a network of creative industries clusters across the UK. And there's some fantastic conversations emerging from those as we're comparing progress along our journeys. We're building on the already nationally and globally recognised strengths of the Bristol+Bath region, and the project aims to supercharge the creative industries across the Bristol+Bath region by connecting the expertise and resources we have within our academic institutions and really kind of bolstering the research and development and innovation capacity across the region. As part of this, we have engaged a number of fellows, some of whom you'll be hearing from today, and a range of industry partners, really building the capacity, capability and interconnectedness across the West of England region. The universities bring a range of strengths and diverse assets to the table, and it allows some unique opportunities for local creative industries to engage with the expertise and resources that are available to them. Just some of them are available on screen, and thank you to all of those partners that are working with us to make this project possible. We're also engaging deeply with industry, and that's industry from the local region as well as nationally. And we're drawing upon their expertise to join these cohorts of academics and industry practitioners and professionals to share thinking. And what we're going to hear from today is a mix of some of the outcomes of that deep thinking and research in partnership with our industry partners, and also the progress of some of the prototype developments that were commissioned after the deep thinking stage. So again, really grateful for everything that our industry partners are bringing as well. The overall project is structured into 5 pathfinders. So you're going to hear today from our digital placemaking cohort, which is just coming to an end and will be showcased in April 2021. Underway, we're also working with an expanded performance cohort, and we're asking some really timely questions about what liveness and togetherness means, which at a time of shutdown, lockdown, and turmoil for the creative industries, some very pertinent research questions being asked. Later this year, we'll be launching Amplified Publishing, which is looking at how what the future of content creation, distribution, discovery, and consumption may hold. And also underway is a longer-term strategic look at creativity as a network and connected practice. So opportunities to engage with us on all those areas, including a commissioning phase for expanded performance, will be launched early next year. So on to digital placemaking. What do we mean by digital placemaking? Well, we're looking at digital placemaking as a means to enhance and deepen the relationship between people and places. We believe the best examples of digital placemaking are co-designed by different communities. And when we're talking about public realm, we're regarding the public realm as something that embraces all the external places in our towns and cities that are accessible to all. These are everyday spaces that we move through and we linger within. The places where we live, where we work, and where we play. Data and digital technologies is changing the way that we engage with place, and you only need to look at the apps on your mobile to ask yourself how many of those are using location-based information. And this new geospatial data layer can be used for a whole different range of purposes, from augmenting places with sounds and images, on top of the digital foundation of cities that closely link to traffic management, environmental, safety and security systems. Our programme director, Professor John Dovey, stated that these technologies are giving us new ways to use the city, but they're also beginning to shape the ways the city uses us. So a really thoughtful thoughtful comment there. I also mentioned the prototype teams that were commissioned, and we're delighted that Ruby Jennings from Stupid Cities will be talking to us today. We also have 3 other projects on the go. PopMap, being delivered by City ID and Calvium, is looking at new digital applications for real-time place-based events and activities around Bristol. Narratives, being delivered by Boomsat Suma and Iconic Black Britons, has been commissioned to showcase the intersections of culture, creativity and difference, co-constructing a collective augmented reality experience of place, and that's using the 7 Saints of St Paul's murals. And finally, before we hear from Stupid Cities, Everything is Music is being delivered by Clarke magazine and Landmark, really showcasing the musical heritage across both cities, and celebrating in a self-guided AR tour some unseen and unheard examples to showcase the unique musical fabric of both cities. So that's all from me. I'm going to hand over to our panel in one moment, starting with Paul. If you want to keep up with what the Bristol+Bath Creative R&D partnership is up to, please do follow us on Twitter at Bristol_Bath RD. You can get in touch with us by email, info@bristolbathcreative.org, or sign up to our newsletter where you hear about what we're up to and any funding calls or opportunities to engage with us through our newsletter. That's bristolbathcreative.org/newsletter. So I'm now going to invite Paul to the stage, and as if by magic, he's appeared. And Paul's going to give us an insight into some of his work around the work you've been doing around Feature Places Toolkit and more. So over to you, Paul.
Hello. So I'm just going to try and share my screen. Let's see if that works. Hopefully you should be able to see. Yeah. So on my digital placemaking fellowship, I've explored creative foresight, how getting together and coming up with science fictions for your neighborhood could be a way of prototyping. That's, I guess, why Adam's asked me to kick off this panel on technology and the public realm towards 2030. In fact, what I'm going to introduce uses futures as tools to reflect on people's needs and wants for their places, and uses AR to visualize their speculative architectures. I'll show you some of the collaborative designs, though I don't think any of them are for 2030. Actually, there is one for 2029. So what I've been developing through my Digital Placemaking Fellowship is Future Places Toolkit, which is an AR engagement activity for community visioning and participatory planning consultation, which aims to inspire people to imagine better futures for their places. It combines guided conversations and provocations with an AR app to facilitate citizen-led conversations about the future of local neighbourhoods. The idea is that the toolkit can be applied at various stages of a planning and design process and could be used in lots of different places and contexts. It's a collaboration between my theatre company, Uninvited Guests, sound artist Duncan Speakman, creative technologists Michela Panagrossi and Luca Biada from Fenizi, and we've been partnering with architects Stride Treglown and Knoll West Media Centre. It's being co-designed, iteratively developed and tested with our partners and communities. So some of you will probably have experienced planning consultations, which can admittedly be a bit dry. Consultation with local residents tends to take place away from the site of the development itself, with plans displayed like this in community centres or town halls. Just going to play a video in the background here. So this is a video of an early version at 2019's Dutch Design Week. Future Places Toolkit allows collaborative drawings to be viewed, layered over existing buildings, and conversations to happen in situ between members of the local community, council planners, architects and developers. We hope it's an entertaining and engaging approach, and it aims to get more representative people involved in sharing hopes and dreams for their place in a situation without hierarchy. Everyone's stories about the future get heard, and the architecture they describe is visualized immediately around them using AR. Live, spatialized sound brings their ideas to life, giving the future places atmosphere and supporting their imaginings. Future Places Toolkit lets participants see, hear and experience different futures, making them more tangible and giving people a better sense of what they would be like to live in. In this way, we hope to help people understand and influence. In this way, we hope to help people understand and influence decisions about plans for their neighbourhoods. Ultimately, our aspiration is to feed into better development briefs, to use digital means to enable people to have more impact on the design of their public realm and what gets built. So Luca and Michela, the creative technologists, have been developing the software and network so participants' speculative ideas can be drawn real-time by an artist remotely. We've moved away from the marker-based approach to AR tracking. We've moved away from the marker-based approach to AR tracking that we were using in favor of an anchor-based system. Users can now turn 360 degrees and see the visualizations appear around them and move physically within the virtual 3D environment. So they have more agency and it's more immersive. The artist can spawn or place 3D objects in the Unity AR scene, and we're currently working on integrating architects' designs so existing plans can be seen, discussed and adapted in situ, and exploring how the visions that each group of participants have drawn can be displayed using the AR app for others to browse through afterwards, interact with and explore in the site. As Sarah Jenkinson from Stride Tregowan has said, the government's white paper on reforms to the planning system, Planning for the Future, certainly suggests that they're aiming for a more digitally enabled engagement process. So investment in tech solutions for making planning and placemaking more accessible and easier to get involved with may present opportunities for what we're developing. As the open source Smart Citizen platform says, we can only build smart cities together with smart citizens by providing the tools and knowledge to foster citizen engagement. Having limited participants to 6 at a time and put in place COVID-safe measures, social distancing and sanitizing our selfie sticks, we were able to run our first public tests on Philwood Broadway in August. Here's some images of that. Bristol City Council's been consulting around the remaking of the Broadway. If you've got any thoughts about a neighbourhood or development site where it could be beneficial to do some engagement experiments with the AR app, do let me know. Inspired by designers Dunn and Raby, we're exploring whether asking what if and visualising speculative architecture can make debates happen about the kind of future people want and do not want. We hope Future Places Toolkit can inspire communities to do some social dreaming together about their places in 2025, 2030, 2050 and beyond. As Anab Jain of Superflux writes, we hope that through the lens of the future, we can help people reflect better on the present, on the decisions and the actions we take today, can reflect better on the present, on the decisions and the actions we take today, on where we want to be and what we can do to get there. Thanks.
That's great, Paul. Thank you very much indeed for that insight, and we'll look forward to welcoming you back onto the panel for the discussion afterwards.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks for your introduction, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you. So I'm now going to invite our second speaker today, Will Taylor. Will was born and raised in southwest London to first-generation Ghanaian immigrants and quickly learnt to question the issues raised by the diasporic experience. His work as a podcaster, creative producer with the Be It Rising Arts Agency and trustee of Barnaby explores how we can pull new communities into conversations around creative tech and its use in the cultural sector. And Will, I have to say, having listened in full to your podcast last night, which you produced, which was a wonderful conversation. It was a fantastic way of reflecting on your journey so far. So I won't throw in any spoilers, but really enjoyed that. So thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you, Adam. Honestly, that's like the best thing to hear before I crack on. Hey everyone, and thanks for being here with us today. And thank you, Paul, for that pretty in-depth and insightful presentation. I think what was really lovely to look at and see in those like images that have been created through the Future Places Toolkit was how playful some of the like future imaginations of your participants, kind of like ideas of what a future city should look like. And I think the reason I've kind of like segued with that is because I was fortunate, and I'm fortunate enough to be one of the new talent fellows. So I'm effectively stepping into this space of exploring creative tech and how technology can help sort of embed communities into the futures of a city, with pretty much no experience of applying creative tech from a sort of like ideation into development, into creation and realization process. So I was pretty green, pretty naive, and very early on in the project, I realized that I could lean into that. And I think my thinking around digital placemaking immediately took me to this idea of belonging. I'm going to paste something in chat. for everyone. So in my research and in my reading, I was doing a lot of work around the works of people like Brené Brown and subsequently Maya Angelou, as well as like some more like established philosophical thinking around city planning and stuff. And I was trying to understand for how to bring marginalized communities into the conversation effectively, how to help marginalized communities participate in the development and ideation of these different tools effectively and bits of tech that are used to enhance our experience of our everyday life. And coming across this quote, "You are only free when you realize you belong no place. You belong every place, no place at all. The price is high, the reward is great." Really put the journey that I am on into perspective. In fact, I was entering this process really trying to understand what Maya Angelou meant in the first part of that statement, realizing you belong to no place and you belong every place, and understanding what tech can do to enhance that understanding and experience of our everyday lives. As my work began to develop, I realized I came to understand what the second part meant, and that the price is high and the reward is great. In that, usually working with marginalized communities, so much of the conversation and so much of the way we work is extractive. And sort of like consultation processes and community consultation processes are sort of built in a way that, from my personal experience, and definitely from those from my peers as well, we're kind of like perpetually in this process of reliving traumatic episodes and traumatic situations and experiences we've had, in order for developers to understand where the tools can aid and help our experience of whichever situation it is. This one specifically, I was looking at how people move around and their behaviors and policing and their sense of belonging in the cultural spaces that Southwest has to offer. But what I wanted to do was recognize that the tech was the means to the end. And I had to sort of rewire my language and understand that the tech wasn't necessarily the end, and the conversations we were having weren't necessarily the means to the end. So my work began to move into a space of trying to develop a process. And I had this like really interesting moment off the back of one of the sort of like, we had these like really great sense-making sessions early on in the fellowship. And I had recently watched Edward Scissorhands, and I'm sure everyone's acquainted with the film. And I remember really vividly like him trying to understand how to best use these tools that he'd like ended up with effectively. And in his process of trying to understand how to use the tools on the end of his arms, he ended up hurting himself and hurting a lot of people who were close to him. And that paralleled for me with the sort of like extractive rehashing of trauma processes that a lot of these sort of inclusive situations, the shape that they took very early on. And what I start to think about is how can we develop ways to capture this data, because it's really, really important. I'm sure with how cultural spaces have had to adapt to COVID, gathering quantitative data has become a lot easier, because people are having to sign into places, sign out, offer their details, offer donations, so on and so forth, put in their postcode, so we can get a better understanding in a lot of places of where our audiences are coming from. Subsequently, we can project how much expendable income our audiences have by how much they're able to donate to help keep our organizations afloat. But when the people are in the space, their experience is so much more complex, and there's a whole new realm of qualitative data that doesn't necessarily get captured in a quick type form. So my process and my thinking around this work starts to think of how we can use play, which is why I loved the ideas that came up in the Future Cities Toolkit, because people were looking at 2050 and having Ferris wheels and slides in the middle of massive cities, which is so important because that is where we want to be. Play is a generative space, and it allows you to learn from difficulty in a much more natural and embodied way. So that is effectively where I've gotten to in terms of at this point in 2020, and I'm now developing the second iteration of a more playful way. At this moment in time, really rudimentary, because we're still trying to explore ways to merge qualitative and quantitative data. But we are still really trying to explore ways to capture the quantitative data of how people move around spaces in cultural spaces in the city, and especially for marginalized communities, and recognizing the intersectionality in that, and understanding that we can only ever really understand the rules that are in place fully if we explore a new set of rules mapped on top of the rules that already exist. And that is my digital placemaking fellowship in a nutshell, up to date. And I'll hand back over to Adam.
That's great, Will. Thank you so much for that insight. Again, encourage anyone tuning in to listen to that podcast, which is just crafted in a beautiful way. All of our fellows' insights and reflections are available on the Bristol+Bath Creative.org website. So plenty to read and to delve a bit deeper into what you're hearing this afternoon. So thanks, Will. Okay, I'm going to call Ruby to the stage now. So Ruby Jennings is a multimedia artist. She's, as well as being involved in this program, at one half of the prototype team from Little Lost Robot. She's also an automation fellow on the Southwest Creative Technologies Network, and brings together a range of skill sets to make sensory, immersive 3D artwork, amalgamating robotics, automation, humanities, and well-being. Teaming you up here, Ruby. So we're going to hear a bit about Stupid Cities. Also, I think you might touch on Playable Cities, which is another project that you're developing, both very relevant to digital placemaking. So thanks for being here, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Adam. Hi, guys. I don't know quite if I can come up after Will. That was a really beautiful piece of speech there, and I think that I will be ad-libbing quite a bit more than that today. But I just wanted to talk about Lost Robot and what we do and what that means in terms of the public space, because all our work is public space based, and it's about ways in which we can interact and adapt public spaces for a more inclusive society, really. So Lost Robot is a CIC, and it basically is me. I'm a designer and maker. I've been building really big things for a very long time. I'm also a traveller artist. I come from an Irish traveller family, and I spent most of my life not living in a house. And when I was living in a house, it was generally in a very rough council estate. So I really am an outsider maker. Joseph is a disabled artist, and his work deals with the societal limitations imposed by disability. We really believe in demystifying technology and making it more accessible, as well as investigating and making visible the environmental, societal, ethical, and data issues that arise in the age of smart technology. So we have a background in producing large-scale outdoor work, and we really believe in taking inclusion to the heart of the design process. So we're really passionate about creating alternate future narratives that can explore a sustainable, more human-friendly world. And in the last year, we've been really fortunate in having 2 large prototype projects that we can do that. So one of them has been the wonderful one we've done with the clusters called Stupid Cities. And in the essence, what we're saying with that is that cities are stupid. We want them to be smart. We want them to be these brilliant digitally enabled places. But if you're in a wheelchair, if you have any mobility issues, or if indeed, even if you're pushing a pushchair, they are not designed for you. And quite often things which we see as really minor things, you know, that are microaggressions in that space can be really dangerous and very scary to people. It stops people getting out. So Stupid Cities is a project that's about tackling that, and it's about looking at how we can change the public space to actually make it something that all members of the public can be in. I mean, it's become even more kind of important now with everything else. So what we started with is we worked with a group of participants who had a various range of mobility issues, either that in invisible disability issues or very visible ones in terms of mobility issues, or wheelchairs or scooters and things like that. And we put together a set of workshops where we looked at how people engaged in the public space, how they felt about those engagements, where they'd go to, where they felt safe, where they didn't feel safe. And it was It was really deep, actually. We realised really quickly that it wasn't a technology project, it was an art project that also countered trauma, because trauma is really inherent in anything that involves a microaggression, that involves going out somewhere where you're not welcome for one reason or another, because we found very quickly that urban spaces are really designed for a very small subsection of the population, and pretty much everyone else coming into these spaces feels in one way or another like an outsider. So with Stupid Cities, what we've been working on is ways in which we can kind of break that down and kind of highlight and shout about the issues in our urban spaces. So we've designed a digital app. So it's web-based, it's not on a mobile, so you don't need an expensive phone to be able to download it. You can just use it on anything that can connect to the internet. And in it, you can log your microaggressions. So you can log on a map the places that you struggle to get about, how they make you feel. You can put your stories in, you can put in pictures, and it gives you a different kind of way of mapping a space. It allows you the space to be able to think about how your journeys are and how they might be different to other people's journeys. So that's up and running. We'll have that launch next April. We've also started doing microgrants, which basically mean we reach out to other artists who also struggle with these issues with the urban space because of disability. And we've produced a whole body of artwork that we're going to take out as a touring piece. What we want to do long term is go to a city and work with local community organisations and work with local arts organisations to run a series of workshops about these issues and these shouts and screams about the urban space, and present at the end of this period of time space for people to talk and to shout and to community build, but also a digital footprint in the terms of the map, where people can see where it's not so great for getting about and where it is okay to get about, and therefore kind of find those safe routes through the city spaces. I mean, long term, we want to just completely rebuild cities in a way that's more accessible for everyone, but we know that this is going to be a project that's going to roll and roll over time, and it's great at least that we've been able to find that space where people can shout about it. The other thing we've been doing is we've been using LiDAR systems to see if we can measure things like the gradients of curbs and the gradients of hills, which are things that are not accessible on maps. So if you use Google Maps, you'll see that the only thing that they think that has wheels is a bicycle. So if you're logging into Google Maps and you're trying to take a journey in a wheelchair, you'll find it very difficult indeed to kind of have any idea of how hard that journey is actually going to be, where you're going to end up, whether you're going to end up in dangerous traffic, whether you're going to be able to get up a curb. It stops people going out. So that's one strand of what we're doing, and we're still working on that. We're going to be launching that in April next year. But we have also just completed a whole project called Playable Spaces, which is about how we can change the city space. And by that, we've been working with soft robotics and again with LiDAR systems to build these large-scale pavilion spaces that are more adaptable to people's actual needs. We think that one of the things that's likely to come out in 2020 and through to 2030 is the need to make spaces that we can change quite easily, because I think that public spaces in by its very nature is temporal. You know, these city spaces that are built in the 60s and 70s are now not fit for purpose, and we feel that by building adaptable spaces we might be able to play more and make spaces therefore more inclusive, because we can include more people, we can have more people working on these spaces and looking at different ways in which they can be. We also feel that, like, at the moment you need to spend money to be able to go out into the city, and we feel like by building these pavilions and taking these places out, we'll be able to create spaces where people can come for free and work and plug in their phones and feel some sense of ownership over the space. We found out yesterday that we've just got some Arts Council funding next year to carry on our Playable Spaces project, and what we will be doing with that is we'll be working with a local disability charity and the Egg Theatre in Bath to look at digital physical interfaces and ways in which we can allow people to feel heard in city spaces and change city spaces to make them more suitable in non-permanent ways that are digitally enhanced. So by that we mean like building canopies that can open at certain times of day, or creating seating that can roll in and out. Or just creating arts interventions, you know, that make a city feel more owned by the people that actually live in it. Alongside that, we've also been doing soft robotic workshops, and my background is obviously in making, and those have been really exciting because by showing people how simple robotics can be, you allow people to take ownership over that process of automation. So a lot of the stuff we've been doing with 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, and we're going, look, anything can be a robot. All you have to do is be able to make something move. And once you can make something move, you can program that thing. You can build stuff out of the airbags. You can build stuff out of old pillowcases. You can even make soft robots out of old Tesco's bags if you want to. But the idea is that you understand that fundamental concept of you controlling that movement and that being owned by you. So a lot of the work we're doing is kind of dealing with that. And when I look into the future, sometimes I don't feel any hope at all, because obviously we live at a very complex and pivotal time. But sometimes I see all these amazing ways in which the technology we have at the moment, if we can take ownership of it, can really change the public spaces for good long term. Building spaces that are movable, that are adaptable, that are sustainable, that host plant life, that are microcosms in themselves, that are self-irrigated, that are solar powered. The technology is already there. All we need to do is be able to seize the control of it, and therefore the control of those public spaces. Anyway, that's kind of what we're doing. I'm going to stick a link to my website in the comments box, and I'm going to stop talking now.
That's great, Ruby. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, bringing the play back into placemaking, I think that's fantastic and really great to hear how both projects are progressing. I'm going to invite our final speaker onto the stage now, Stephen Hilton. Stephen's worked on smart cities really since the term was first invented. He's founder and director of Bristol Futures Global, which is a leading UK smart cities consultancy. Also acts as a strategic advisor on smart cities and the regions for both West Midlands Combined Authority, and is undertaking some visioning work in Bath and North East Somerset. And is also a fellow of the University of Bristol and a trustee of Bristol Architecture Centre. I'm exhausted just reading that, Stephen. I'm just going to hand over to you based on your work that you've done as a fellow on the Digital Placemaking project, and we'll come back with the rest of the panellists for a discussion. Over to you.
Thank you, Adam. I do seem to have a lot of hats, but as I often say, I've only got one head to put them on. It was really quite an extraordinary time to be a digital placemaking fellow. The world underwent a decade or more's worth of digital transformation in a matter of weeks and months. Now, as somebody who's worked on smart cities, connected cities, digital cities for, well, 2 decades, possibly more, part of me was thinking, oh my God, what have we been dreaming of for all of these years? And at the same time, part of me was thinking, how on earth would we have survived without this? I called my digital placemaking report Rebooting the Digital City, Digital Placemaking at the Edge. And I guess what I was thinking about was the way that everybody's worlds had shrunk as a consequence of the pandemic, and how our local neighbourhood spaces became more important than ever before. Now, my thinking has carried on evolving since I published my report. And perhaps rather than thinking just about the city in terms of its edges, I'm also now thinking about the city in terms of proximity. I've been very struck recently by a professor called Carlos Marino from the Sorbonne in Paris. And his vision is for the 15-minute city. And what he means by that is that we all ought to be able to access the essence of what it means to be urban. So work, housing, health, leisure, food, culture, education. But we should be able to access those things through a 15-minute walk or cycle from where we live. Now, this sort of flies in the face of the way that cities are currently developed and planned. He talks about bringing the city back to the rhythm of the people rather than the rhythm of cars. And he has a really nice phrase. He talks about illusionary acceleration. This idea that being in cars saves us time is in fact illusory, because actually all we're doing is spending time in cars. So there are many cities around the world that are starting to pick this idea up. In Paris, Mayor Anne Hidalgo has identified the 15-minute city as a key opportunity. But closer to home, WECA, the West of England Combined Authority, include reference to the 15-minute city as part of its consultation on the new spatial planning strategy. And as Adam said, we've been doing some work with Bath and North East Somerset Council and the strategic partners there, looking at the new vision for Baines up to 2030. And this idea of the 15-minute neighbourhood is something that's come through very strongly. So what I'd like to think about is where technology fits into this idea of the 15-minute place. And I've got a few reflections that I'll share with you. Paul earlier talked about plan tech. And I think there is a sense in which the way that our cities are planned doesn't yet benefit from the digital systems and information that now exist. I'd be really interested in being able to access a sophisticated digital twin that would allow us to model different types of interventions within Bristol and within its communities. For example, how many car journeys every day could be reduced by strategically placing co-working spaces on the edges of cities to stop people needing to drive into the centre every day. I also like this idea of place tech. During the pandemic, we saw that search engines like Google struggled to keep up with hyperlocal information. Normal patterns of opening hours were disrupted, and it was difficult to sort of even find out when the local chemist was open on a daily basis. So this idea of creating more place-based intelligent systems and information is of interest. Within the Creative Clusters programme, we have City ID through their POP map, looking at completely reinventing the way that we relate to maps and designing them specifically for local people and localities. In my report, I played around with the idea of what might happen if instead of saying, "Hey Siri," we said, "Hey Bristol," or "Hey Knoll West," or "Hey Philwood," and whether that could be a route into accessing the tacit knowledge and collective experience of people who live in those localities. I also continue to be interested in what I would call DEM tech, so technology for democracy. This is actually where I started my interest and my career in connected cities more than 20 years ago, but it still feels like we've got a huge opportunity to go deeper into neighbourhoods and to look at how we use the platforms that people have started to use during the pandemic, not just to provide care and support, although that's important, but also to think about how those platforms can evolve into decision-making platforms. And finally, in the report, I talk about edge computing and edge tech. Somewhere in this, there is a need to think about how we start to bring the cloud that contains all of our data and our information, how we bring that back to proximity to local communities. And I think edge computing, the idea that we bring the processing power within the networks closer to the people that are creating the data, is a model that could help us. So finally, why do we need to do this? Well, our horizon is 2030. And that's the horizon that many of our local authorities and universities have set in order to become zero carbon. So if we aren't applying these technologies to help us develop more sustainable, greener and lower carbon ways of living and working, we're not going to achieve that goal. So the challenge that I would like to set for the ecosystem within Bristol and Bath is to really think about how to use this technology to help achieve that goal. So I'll stop there and thank you.
That's great, Stephen. Thank you very much. That was fantastic. I'm going to invite the rest of the panelists to rejoin us on the stage now. And we've got 15 minutes for a panel discussion. Thanks everyone for the notes and the comments you're making on the chat. Some really lovely feedback there. Much appreciated, and already some links that I know we're going to follow up together, which is really, really helpful. One key theme that's coming out of everything that you've said, and actually a key theme within the Bristol+Bath Creative R+D programme, is that of inclusion and accessibility. And I'm just wondering, through the work that you've done over the last few months, how do you think technology could genuinely catalyse truly inclusive and accessible placemaking and space making, which I know, Paul, is a term that you've used in your research. Paul, maybe start with you. In terms of how we can address that.
I mean, I think for me, and it's why I use that term space making, which I know Will's keen on as well. But it's I guess it's how we make the hybrid spaces accessible, and how we design them through diversity and inclusion rather than designing in barriers to access. I guess it's about making those digital layers available to diverse voices and people who are underrepresented, rather than amplifying the digital divide and the existing inequities, I guess. So yeah, it's for me, that's what needs to be thought about. Of course, that depends. That comes to a question we might come to later around the kind of ownership of those digital layers also, and whether they are public realm or common spaces, or if instead they're privately owned public spaces online. And yeah, I guess it's, what's important is to be responsible tech developers and to think through the intended and the unintended consequences as you're iteratively developing your platform or service. And I think those platforms or services, including digital placemaking platforms, need to be co-created really as tools with diverse users, and they need to respond to challenges communities identify, respond to people's wants and needs for them. All too often, app developers will be kind of bringing in communities and users later on in the process when they want to test out, content generation, and the communities become content providers. And what's important, I think, is that the citizens are there from the start, at the point of conception, and they're involved in co-creating the app from the beginning, and in a way that those apps respond to the features citizens might want out of placemaking software.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Ruby, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I did. I think there's a really interesting place where digital technology can help urban spaces, and that is in the fact that urban spaces are temporal in nature. So they change over time. They change over time over a year. Also, they change between day and night. And I think there's a really interesting space where digital technology can impact that. So we can make spaces that are adaptable to day and to nighttime, and also can change over the course of the day. And I'd really like to see what's going to happen with that kind of technology and that kind of thought processes over the next decade. Because at the moment we see an urban space and it's fixed, it's not transitory, whereas the movement of people through the space is transitory. I think that over the next 10 years we'll find that our urban spaces are also transitory in nature, that things will change over the course of the day and over the course of the night, and that will make our urban space more welcoming and also more accessible.
Thank you, Ruby. Will, you talked about lived experience and about the kind of apparent repetition of the lived experience and everything that brings up. Actually, only this week, the Mayor of Bristol, Marvin Rees, was promoting the value in employing people in construction and development projects in local communities because of the benefits that lived experience can bring. Do you want to add any further reflections on that?
Yeah, I think it's just a springboard off of the temporal idea that Ruby has been referring to, in that there's an implicit attachment to the spaces that we hold and the spaces that we run through. I remember working with Duncan a few years ago, and he was referring to this idea of shadow time. And in one of his pieces, he really plays with the idea of shadow time, in that you start this experience at one place, you walk all around the city, and then you have to come back to a place that's just a few yards away from where you started, but you have to reflect on what you were seeing at your starting position. And I'm saying all of that because it's through that kind of application of lived experience into tech development that we'll be able to keep these stories and keep the history of places alive and make sure that the future is built on something that we're proud of that has come before. And with that, it's about the celebration of the lived experience. You know, you have to take the good with the bad. However, we can't really uphold and uplift the past if what we're using to build the future is all of the negative parts of the past. I hope that made sense. I was mincing my words a bit.
So that's great. That's great. Thank you. Let's move on to another question around.
We've lost sound, Adam.
I think we've lost you for a moment, Adam.
I'm back. I'm sorry about that. It was fantastic what I was saying, so you've missed the best bits. Stephen was talking about the WECA spatial development strategy, and that consultation is actually live now. So people do have an interest in placemaking. This is a really important regional document to have a read of and then feedback. They're looking at the development of homes, employment spaces, and transport links over the next 20 years. We had a question from Ivona Tempowski asking about the involvement of community transport operators, as that bus ride is an important part of the visit and how we can activate transport. Starting with you, Stephen, what do you think policymakers and politicians could learn from our collective experiences? And because they're looking to achieve a cleaner, greener, and more inclusive region through that strategy, what do you think are the key takeaways from our work?
Yeah, so there's a tension I always feel around the role of these type of strategies for placemaking. The local plan and the spatial plan, they are documents that attempt to define the way that space will be used for anything up to 10 years or more. And of course, we live in a world that increasingly doesn't allow us the luxury of that level of certainty. So I think one of the takeaways from our work is around starting to think about how those strategic frameworks and plans can be a bit more iterative, a bit more live, a bit more agile, a bit more able to benefit from and respond to sort of live inputs that help to sort of create relevance rather than marking a point in time which everything then needs to be measured from. So, having a spatial strategy will be great. Having a spatial strategy as a live interactive document that can be iterated multiple times over the next decade would be an amazing ambition to have.
That's great, thank you. Ruby, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I think they need to host more street parties. I know that sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but we're looking at a time when we're going to be pedestrianising a lot of our urban spaces really soon with the incoming use of electric vehicles and also lots more people working from home. I don't think that even post-pandemic, most people will be forced back into an office very easily now we've all been able to work in our gym jams, let's be fair. Street parties and festival events are a really good way of user testing different ways of using a street. If you close the roads and allow loads of people into a space, you can play and adapt urban spaces really quickly. And if you record those findings, you've got a really amazing way of very individualistically looking at a way in which a community can use a space differently. And because you have people coming from outside, but also essentially street parties and street festivals are a real localized thing, you get a whole range of opinion as well. So if I was personally working for WECA, I would say that actually the arts have a great role to play in terms of rebuilding and reimagining our public spaces, especially when it comes to live events. I think that there is so much room for us all to play and to trial different ways of redeveloping our urban spaces, because I think that we're going to be using them very differently within the next decade. And I think that they should really look to local arts community organisations and arts organisations to do that.
That's great. And let's not wait for the Platinum Jubilee, which is going to be in June 2022 for the next street party. Answers on a postcard for excuses to have street parties. Paul, you've been working with local politicians, local authorities and community groups in terms of your work. Any takeaways from that about lessons learned?
I think I just wanted to agree really with, I think Stephen's point is great about the idea of, strategic plans remaining open and being iterated. And I think Ruby's point is great about, finding in a way creative, imaginative ways of making what might seem like dry strategic documents that people perhaps might think aren't really for them to get involved in. Finding creative or imaginative ways to engage people with, thinking about neighbourhood visioning and their strategies for the public realm. And Ruby names a few kind of great suggestions like street parties, and in a sense you can think about kind of play testing other possible futures for streets, maybe ones that are kind of people centered rather than car centered. And makes me think, for instance, of Mufti's work, also Pervasive Media Studio residents and their play disrupt work, trying to engage people with planning consultation who might not tend to get involved. So I think those are really good suggestions.
And Will, any comments from you?
I'm so sorry. I was literally just looking for links to Stephen's report because someone asked me that. So.
That's fine. No, not at all. That's fine. Look, it's a minute or so to go before we're out of time. So I think rather than push us over our allocated time limit, because I know that people have got other sessions to go to and other things to do, and we're going to begin to draw that to a close. I'll just give the panel an opportunity to say any other closing comments about anything that's come up this afternoon.
I suppose the one other thing I would say is to return to that idea of the smart citizen, and that thinking about planning strategy and policy. I think what's most important is that that they're ground up and that they involve communities, and that we find creative ways of getting citizens involved, but also knowledgeable citizens. So finding ways to share the data in ways that it's visualized and made accessible, so that people can get involved, but can get involved also with the tools and the understanding that they need to get involved in future strategies for their public spaces.
That's great. That's a great point to close on, Paul. Thank you. I'd like to thank all of our panelists today. So Stephen Hilton, Ruby Jennings, Will Taylor, Paul Clarke. Thank you very much. Look out for our Super Duper Showcase taking place in April 2021, where we'll not only be hearing more about what our fellows have achieved across the programme, but also seeing the results of the hard work that all of our prototype teams are working as well, and be able to show you what they've been up to throughout the programme. For that and more, do visit our website, Bristol+Bath and follow us on Twitter, Bristol_Bath RD. And to keep up to date with any funding announcements or opportunity to engage with us, you can sign up to our newsletter via the website, bristolbathcreative.org/newsletter. So from me, Adam, Powell, thanks very much for joining us today, and have an enjoyable and safe rest of the Friday the 13th. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for joining us.